There you go, Barry.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So we're here to talk about ATB Work Reimagined, powered by G Suite, and talk about positive business disruption. Because for us, moving to G Suite was truly about disruption. And I talked to lots of companies, and the first question they ask is, well, was this disruptive? And I say, yes, absolutely. That was by design, though. And very intentionally so, whereby in order for us to truly transform banking, and we'll talk a little bit about our story a little bit later, we felt that we really needed to change the way we worked. So G Suite has definitely helped us to do that, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So a little bit about ATB Financial. Many of you probably have never heard of us. We're based in Alberta, Canada, and just in Alberta, Canada. We have about $48.6 billion in assets, which would make us around, in the top 25 or 30 in North American financial institutions. So just to give you some context. We have about 173 branches and 143 agencies right across the province of Alberta, from Milk River, which is basically a little small town at the southernmost point, almost on the US border, right up to High Level, which is at almost towards the border with the Northwest Territories. About 5,300 team members. We have almost 8,500 G Suite accounts. We can talk more about that later. And then about roughly 750,000 retail customers, covering about 247 locations across the province of Alberta. So really pleased to be here. My name is Barry Hench. I lead our technology enablement team within the transformation group at ATB Financial. Technology enablement, for lack of a better phrase, is IT. We feel that we are truly going back to the roots of IT by enabling business teams through technology, G Suite being one of those examples. I'm here with Calvin Seaman as well. Calvin's one of our directors of communication within our reputation and brand group, and we were both part of what we were very intelligently named as the G team at ATB, amongst a few others, led by our chief evangelist, Lauren Rubis. And so we're really pleased to be here. G Suite has been truly transformative for us at ATB, and we're happy to share the story. And it really starts with building an adaptive culture. And Google has been at the center of that. G Suite has been at the center of that, in and amongst other things. With ATB, we have what we call our story, and again, I'll show you that here in a minute. But the story really is our guiding principle of what we're trying to achieve, which is ultimately customer happiness. And so over the last, I would say, 3 or 4 years, ATB has worked hard on developing a culture where we begin to question everything we do. And G Suite is one of those examples where we're able to actually move ourselves forward because we've actually simplified the way team members work, so that we are able to work better on behalf of our customers. And so, again, it really comes down to putting the customer at the center of the conversation and having a culture that's about really 2 things. It's about, well, 3 things, I should say. It's really about listening, so making sure we understand what our customer needs are. Banking, financial services are being disrupted enormously, and so we really wanted to be able to continue to promote a listening culture. It's also about being customer obsessed. So again, putting the customer at the center of the conversation. In banking, that's highly unusual. It's still very much about the risk profile of the bank and those kinds of metrics, which often are at the detriment to customers. And then it's about transformation. And so when it comes to Work Reimagined, it's really about finding the balance to increase overall team member satisfaction, as well as ultimately for our customers. And so we talked about customer obsession, but it's also very much around team member obsession. And so, again, when we looked at it, team members were not satisfied in the old MS Office world that we came from. That simple example of, you log into your computer in the morning and you go to Outlook, and it takes 15 minutes to load Outlook because you've got all these massive PST files associated with it, and then you're working away and have Outlook those problems have gone away from them. And actually, it's surprising how quickly you forget about
I think I hit
days.
Control S still for a few months after we went to G Suite. Instead of habit Control S, because I didn't want to lose the work I was working on.
Yeah, just the autosave capabilities is just, again, making it very easy for team members to get their job done. And we'll have other examples of some of the productivity gains we've seen. But really, at the center of this is, again, customer obsession and listening. And so when we look at transforming banking, which is a big lofty goal of ours, it really does become around fixing the processes. In fact, our chief customer officer recently became our new CEO, and uses very strong language around finding a way to kill processes that customers hate. And very much of that was based on the way we were working internally, sending that classic example of forms that are in Word documents that get sent around that are either incomplete or don't have all the right information and get sent back as attachments. And I think all organizations deal with or suffer from these kinds of problems. And by breaking those down, like co-authoring documents within Docs, or now with some of the AI features of G Suite, the Explore button, are really transforming how team members are able to do their jobs and be able to spend more time with customers. It isn't a trade-off anymore. In fact, we've made things so much easier in terms of mobility and other things that we're able to see those successes come through. And so, again, why Google? So there you can see on the right side the ATB story. I won't read it word for word. You can visit atb.com if you're interested in learning more about it. But it's our 94-word, basically, mission statement. And again, at the center of it is customer happiness, which for a bank to talk about is, again, a bit unusual. So whether that's buying your first home, whether that's buying your first car, saving for retirement, whatever that happiness is for that individual customer. But there are also key phrases in this story that, again, drive our decision to go to Google and G Suite specifically. So even just the notion of transforming banking, reimagining it, making it work for people. Again, that's very centered on how do we make the team member experience smoother so that they can spend more time with their customers. One of my favorite phrases in the ATB story is really make their time richer, which again is very centered at the customer. But when I look at it from a team member perspective, again, we spend tons of time doing wasted work, whether it's replying to email or again, we're trying to do document revisions and all those types of things. By moving to G Suite, we've just, again, made it really simple and very accessible. And so at the end of the day, again, there's a lot of stuff in the story, but the bottom line is Google has helped us to be smart, simple, and helpful, whether, again, to customers or to our team members. And so so I mentioned Lauren Rubis earlier, so he's our chief evangelist. And again, a little bit unusual for a bank to have a chief evangelist. He's been a big part of driving our cultural shift, which has been very important to set the stage for G Suite. So, this, like I mentioned earlier, this is not a technology project at all for us, and hasn't been since day one. Obviously, there's technology that comes with this, but it's more about, again, how people are working and how we can transform it. And so, at the end of the day, that cultural direction of challenging the status quo has become really important for us to drive that overall view to what needs to happen to make, be customer obsessed or to listen to our customers better. And ultimately to think differently about it, because it really does come to survival, right? ATB is we like to joke, is now that 80-year-old startup. We'll have our 80th anniversary here in late September. And as a part of that celebration, it'll be recognizing that history, but financial services is being disrupted massively. We would argue that for Albertans, for Canadians, for global citizens, there's the function of banking is what's needed, but banks maybe not. And so for us to survive, we need to do things differently to be able to get there. And so that cultural shift and working with tools like G Suite has helped us to do that. So I'm going to invite Calvin to come up and talk a little bit more about some of the more details of how we approached our implementation, and then I'll come back and we'll talk about some of the technical details. Off to you.
Thank you. I think one thing just to elaborate too on the why Google. So it was the functionality, but it was that mindset. And so as an 80-year-old company owned by the government in Alberta, actually, it had a legacy a bit of being older school and a laggard. And in the last 10 years, we worked really hard on being a startup type mentality and progressive, and so getting that like-minded thing. And then today when we saw at the keynote them talk about work reimagined, I was like, bingo, that's exactly why we partner with them, right? We're already using the same language on both sides. So these are the three phases I'm going to quickly talk through, because we went to, for us anyway, a very different approach to change management and adoption. I think in a lot of previous ones, or maybe even in other Google implementations, you would take a bit more standard, like here's your 1 month warning that you're getting a Gmail account versus Outlook. Here's your 1 week reminder, make sure you've taken this learning. Remember tomorrow you're going to be in Gmail. And so I think really kind of sparked through our chief evangelist. We wanted to come up with a legendary kind of adoption. I think Whirlpool at the time was kind of talked through as the leader in this, and we really wanted to be even better than what had already been launched. So we went from an approach of abundance. We wanted to really cast the net wide. We would have our normal players, communications, learning, change management kind of thing, but we wanted to just really embrace the organization through it, create an environment of psychological safety, where people really challenged why we did things the way we did it. So that's just elaborating on Barry's point that it wasn't about the tools, right? It was, like we knew the tools would enable that, but we had to change people's mindsets to really wonder why we were doing things.
Sorry, Galvin, if I might just pick up on the point about psychological safety, that's actually really important. And in the context of these 3 phases, our go live date actually happened at the end of the Excite and Discover phase, and Adopt and Master has been since go live, when we've been live for just over a year now. And so we didn't expect everyone to be an expert as part of going live, which I think is, again, it was important for team members to feel, because there is obviously a change of work that has to happen to be able to adopt G Suite. So the psychological safety was important, but I think it's even more important that actually comes as a result of now having access to the tools.
Right. Yeah, and we had talked to, obviously we weren't the first organization to do the implementation, so we talked to quite a few. We had the city of Edmonton, which is where our headquarters is as well, had gone through it. And so the feedback we kept hearing was, don't make it just about the tools, right? Because people won't necessarily get the full value out of it. And so people were just dying for the tools by the end, which I think was good. But we kept not necessarily talking about just the tools. It was more, don't do a like for like from an Excel spreadsheet to a sheet. Like, why are you even doing it that way? Why are you collecting that information there? Do you need to? Is there a whole other way you can do it? So really get people through this journey to reimagine how they worked, which was our focus. So people wanted to know why we were going to Google, and we thought we'd get much better buy-in if we focused on that at first. So it wasn't to save money, which I think a lot of people were talking about, they're just doing this to save money. And we had a not so wonderful, maybe technical implementation around 7 years ago where we changed our entire banking system. So we still kind of had that mentality from a lot of people.
Prevalent across it. Don't have it be like that last experience.
Yeah, so we really wanted to tie the why to our story, which was we can't reimagine banking if we don't reimagine the way we work. So that really became a big focus on the conversation. So part of the Ignite and Listen, we had a statement come out probably in January that we were going to go to Google. And then the next thing that really came out was this: we want you to become a G evangelist. So it's obviously not Uncle Sam, that's Lauren Rubis, who's our chief evangelist that we mentioned in the middle. And so this was all about igniting excitement, and people did not know what they were going to sign up for, but we were going to recruit 50 G evangelists. We use the word G thing a lot. G evangelists to help shape the journey. So all they knew at this point was they're going to get seconded for 6 months, I think, was at the outset, or 4 to 6.
Yeah, I thought it was 3 to begin with, but it ended up being 6 by the end of it.
Yeah, and they knew they were going to go to Google in California. And that's about all they knew. So we had people from throughout the organization, all levels, and we really wanted that, and we wanted people to check their titles. So we had tellers working with, I think we went as high as managing director, so right below the VP exec level, that applied. We had 9,000 views, so we had 5,400 people, so we had 9,000 views on the site, people coming back. And within 7 days, we had almost 300 people apply for the experience, which was, and a lot of people couldn't because they had to be available for certain parts of it, and they couldn't. And they were really creative. We wanted people to kind of show their creativity when they applied, so a lot of effort went in that 1 week to get things set up.
Yeah, and I think the key there is really around the self-selection part of that. So often what will happen in these kinds of secondments is the executive will cherry pick people out of their organization to do that. And in this case, we said, no, you can't actually do that. We want the people that are most excited about being part of this transformation to put their hands up and, again, do this sort of auditions type process. But the self-selection became a really big theme for us. So if you can harness the power of those that are most excited about this type of thing, you're way better off, at least in our experience.
Yeah, and we saw, undiscovered stars, right? So there's a lot of people, especially, we kind of see a lot of people in our headquarters in Edmonton and our main corporate office in Calgary, but there's people in branches in rural Alberta that have a passion and a skill set that we would have never picked up on. And a lot of those people, a lot of those 50 people moved into other roles. I don't know what the percentage would be, but more than half.
Nearing, 50% or more of
that would have moved into other roles because
the development.
They knew what they were capable of, and then this gave them the opportunity for other people to see what they were capable of as well. So they went through a 30-day boot camp in the Ignite and Listen phase. They went to Google. We went to Singularity University for half a day as well, and that was early on to mindset. And we did a lot of team building and team forming within those 30 days. And then in that 30 days, they did a lot of the adoption plan. So they know the organization really well. We did persona work where we try to look at how people work versus what their role is, and we really built plans out around that. They did some trade shows just to kind of get people insight into the tools. Of course, it's a public tool for the most part, so people could do that. But especially with the execs and board members, they did trade shows early on. We had, in the Theory of Abundance, we had a Get Shit Done committee and a Vanguard group. And so they were people that were listening for us in the business and giving feedback. And here's what people are saying, and we want more of this. Vanguards would often own some of the tactical execution piece within their worlds as well.
Yeah, and I just want to pick up on the listening part. So obviously that 30-day boot camp was also very focused on being able to talk intelligently about the inevitable resistance that comes with a massive work change. And so I want to make sure that it's understood that this wasn't all sort of rainbows and butterflies or unicorns or whatever you want to say. Like we have pockets of resistance and we continue to work through it. But that's part of that listening, is understanding the concerns of team members. And those Evangelists were armed with a bunch of techniques on how to have those, I'll call it, difficult conversations, and bring a new energy to be able to hopefully work through that.
And one group that was formed in this time was the expert group, because we knew there would be some resistance from people whose job was, especially living in Excel,
yeah. So as a bank, people have the Excel logo tattooed on their shoulder, figuratively, and so you see that, and even with sometimes in other tools, whether it be Word or PowerPoint, and so they wear that as a badge of honor because they become so successful. But now it's about encouraging, being successful in a new way using new tools that may actually include to expand to the rest of GCP, which is pretty exciting as well. And I think we've been able to start to generate that excitement even further going forward.
Right, so that phase was around April, May. June, July, we went into the Excite and Discover, so really building off that Ignite phase. And we wanted to let people start experiencing the G Suite a bit. So we had, how many early adopters did we have by the end?
Oh, we had
5,400.
Well, we had over 800 early adopters by the time we went live.
Right.
That's a whole other conversation.
So they were really discovering it.
Yeah.
And then part of what we wanted to do was make sure everyone had activated their account before we went live and gone through that whole process, so that on the go live date, they could just click into their Gmail and calendar and everything. So we gave people access to G+ communities at this point. And YouTube Live, which has really taken off, like live streaming. So like leaders, we have a weekly transformation talk with our chief transformation officer, and we get a few hundred people. We have hangouts and different themes where people just love that ability to get access to senior leaders that they wouldn't normally. And very consistent, and a commitment from them to stay connected to the organization. But that was one of the ones we did early on as well to get people authenticating. We got people really, again, thinking about the why, so a lot of going to what is it, how will it work compared to this, and through the G Evangelists, the Vanguards, we would get people questioning, or get people to start asking about why are you doing it that way, think about that even before you get the tool. We did G-Wheels, so that van is not actually the vans we sent out. We probably sent out like Toyota 4Runners or something, but we did paint them up. And they went out to the rural communities because, again, our urban markets get a lot of attention and we can easily have an open house and people come by. So we had 8 G Evangelists out, I probably paired up, so in 4 vehicles. I went to 107 branches and did 25,000 kilometers of travel during that time, visiting all the branches. And then we recruited more people in our abundance thing. So the 100+ Blue Glove, these are people who got white glove treatment, so our brand color is blue, so we went to Blue Glove, which
so this is not the Stappy Blue
exactly
glove.
Quickly got equated to your doctor examinations. But so these were predominantly our executives and their EAs, And we thought it was really important to get them on board before we went live, because if they weren't bought in and proficient, it would be hard for them to lead their teams in it. And that worked really well. They were a lot of trying to get people, can you add so-and-so, can you add so-and-so? Because the people they wanted to start working in within the tool set.
Yeah, it was sort of that fire that lit the excitement, because all of a sudden senior executives are using the tools and they're finding how easy it is to collaborate and make document revisions or whatever the case may be. And all of a sudden, yeah, it just exploded because why can't everybody just have this now?
Right.
And so, a lot of organizations will leave the senior executive to the last because for fear of what it might do. In fact, we did the exact opposite, and it was highly successful because they could all of a sudden see what it was going to be like, and sort of promote it as, well, if I can do it, anyone can do it, sort of notion.
Yeah, and we had 250 whizzes and 250 guides. So the G whizzes were people who had previous experience with the G Suite from their personal life, school, whatever. And they had to pass a certain proficiency level because we wouldn't be able to necessarily provide them with a bunch of support early on, but it did give them early access. And they did get an indicator for whether at their workstation, so that when we went live, people would know that they would know some about it. G guides are pretty similar. They didn't necessarily have to have past experience, but they had to pass that proficiency, and they had to be willing to support their peers when we went live. So they needed to be available that first week. Again, they had an indicator, and they could help out there. A few other things we did during this time, again, to make it a bit fun. We did a meme contest about what if we never transformed, because people are resistant to change. So trying to show people like all the things in your life that have gotten so much better because we've made changes like this, and got some really funny entries. I think we had a few hundred people enter into that. We did Googler's Travels and the G Academy, which were our own kind of based learning to get people who wanted to get in there and be comfortable before we went live. We did Work Reimagined TV, so again, utilizing that YouTube channel, and we had it run by Evangelists, and they would do a weekly live show. What's the Google show called? We kind of based it off of. I forget, but we took one snippet where we would talk about a specific piece of the technology, and then we would talk a bit about people, how they were reimagining the way they worked.
Yeah, so I think this really comes into the notion of peer-to-peer learning.
Yeah.
Right. We really wanted the organization to support itself, because there was, again, Calvin, I can remember Calvin and I have a pretty funny conversation one day about, well, how do we tell people politely just to Google it?
Yeah.
Right. Because the answer to your question's out there somewhere. In fact, there's so much material out there that we tried to avoid creating our own content for the most part, although we did in specific cases. But this whole design was really meant around this notion of, how do we connect team members to themselves to grow a community so that they can support each other through this, rather than having, again, massive training sessions where everybody had to sit through 2 hours of Gmail, for example. Again, to be able to promote and again, part of that cultural shift of having team members there to help each other. And I think the live streaming point is really important because, again, especially for our rural branches, and you can imagine some of these towns are really small, and they often find themselves very disconnected from the corporate offices, that this all of a sudden brought them into the mix where they could feel like they were part of the larger ATB again, which was, again, a big cultural shift for us, which has been really important.
And actually, some of the best peer-to-peer we saw happen was in G+ communities. So I'll admit I was a bit of a pessimist maybe in my view on how they take off, but they really took off. And so we had one on Hey Did You Know, where people would share tips on, did you know you could do X, Y, Z, and people would share pictures and stories around that. And we had one called How Do I, where people would really answer questions. So, sometimes it was equating like for like. I used to be able to do this in calendars, how do I do it? Or how can we do this how can I find this type of email in Gmail? And people would just start answering each other's questions. So it avoided the whole call into help desks or even going to the GWhizzes. And I think each of those communities would have had at least 25% of the organization having joined them. So those were really successful. All right, so we did go live July 10th, and I think our goal was to have a non-event, right?
Yeah,
and
the expectation I talked to the team about is, the music to my ears is that, what was the big deal?
Yeah.
And for the most part, that's what we got.
Yeah, we had a command center the day of, and it was just like crickets. Well, I shouldn't say that, because you probably had a couple things to deal with. In my world, it was crickets. And yeah, it was just we kind of walked around the floor and how's it going? Oh, fine. And so it really was a non-event, which was great for us. Probably the biggest thing that pissed off our Evangelist was people had to activate their phones mobily. So we had this brilliant idea of let's do a robocall and tell people on their phone to make sure they do it this weekend. Well, a bunch of people just saw a missed call. He wanted his number to come on so that they knew it was coming for someone, Lauren Rubis. And so they just saw a missed call from Lauren. So he had like hundreds of people calling him back. Right? So I shut my phone off so that because he was trying to call me. I was like, shut your phone off. I don't know what to do. So that was fun. But
yeah, unintended consequences.
Yeah. We had the G-Wheels were still on the road during this time. We created a vault kind of inspired by the Google Garage where we held labs, and I think we had over 65 labs done there, reimagining again how people worked, especially now that they had the tools. The Evangelists, for the most part, had gone back to the business, so we recruited a smaller group of people around product managers who became experts in the tools and could really go to areas that were having problems getting off Microsoft and help them understand that, especially when it's just knowledge of the tool. And then we had facilitators that could help run those labs. And we created the do-it-yourself labs as well, where people would have the ability to run sprints and ask the how might we's and solution. And then one other thing we did was we created a storyteller collective because we knew there would be power in that story of just hearing how other people were using the tools. So we recruited 30 people, again, from out the organization. They weren't seconded. It was an expectation that they would do it on top of their day-to-day. And we ran them through a couple-day boot camp where we brought in people from different media. So we had a creative writer, we had a social media person, photographer, videographer, and just help people learn how to craft a really good story on whatever medium they were going to craft it on. And then we gave them specific assignments to go in and look at how people in branches were working differently, or if it was a specific tool where we had heard stories, where they could really pull out those stories and share them throughout the organization. And so we also had the G Suite City, which was, we had a proficiency model set up with 5 levels of proficiency from basic to guru. And right in the middle was one where it was around got it. And that would mean that people understood how to use, I guess, the vast majority of the functionality someone would use in their day-to-day beyond just sending an email. And we wanted 100% of the organization to get to that got it proficiency. So you could light up these buildings as you passed each of the tests. And we had a bit of a video with our CEO and Lauren competing on who could get to guru. And I think they both cheated a bit to get to guru, but they got there.
Well, they used their peer-to-peer network to
that's right.
Successfully get to guru. That's right.
And actually, our CEO was really transparent too before we went live because we had been doing a lot of promotion and positive, and the Evangelists were just like oozing energy from this. But he was like, there was days I wanted to throw my computer against the wall, or my Chromebook against the wall, right? So he was really good about setting an expectation, but he was a huge advocate and champion for it at the same time.
Yeah, so maybe just do that. One of our value statements at ATB is being confident and humble. And Dave Mowat, who is our now retired CEO, again, that humility of recognizing what team members are going through in a change like this, and being vulnerable about actually having that dialogue and conversation, I think really, set the tone throughout, but certainly at those periods of time, where he would speak up on the topic, team members understood that we actually viewed this as being something that's really difficult. We're asking team members to do a lot by making a change like this, yet it's also so important. It really comes down to, again, survival in a very competitive industry.
And the other fun thing we did was move your shit to the cloud. And so we wanted to shut down our H drives, which would be, you can give a technical.
Yeah, it's basically just your home network drive that's pretty typical in most organizations. Trying to at least move that to Google Drive so that we can at least start to see some of that infrastructure go away on our on-prem side.
So a lot of people were talking about it. Some were offended, but we kind of knew we would do that. But we wanted to get attention. And we had a bit of a contest for people to talk about the funniest thing they found in their H drive. My oldest documents, my first documents were, I started at ATB just about 10 years ago, and my very first project was moving from Windows 95 to Vista. And so those were my initial documents. But of course, I didn't delete any of them.
Let's just forget those days.
Copy and pasted it all over to the cloud. Yeah. All right. So Barry will go over the numbers a bit. But one thing I did want to highlight, I don't think we have on the slide, is our engagement score. Last time we did that big technical change plummeted a lot, like probably 15 to 20%. And this time, we have a fairly highly engaged workforce. At 89% it was last year. We use Aon Hewitt, and then it actually went up to 91% as we went through this transformational journey. So
yeah, so I think it again speaks to making sure that we put team members at the center of this conversation and really thought about it from a how is this going to be adopted? And Calvin didn't say it, but I'll say it, which is the concept of organizational change management is a bit of a four-letter word around ATB. It really does come down to adoption and finding a way for team members to be successful. So we'll talk a little bit more about these, but just to give you some general context in terms of the speed of our implementation, and I should have done this earlier, so my apologies. We actually signed our deal right at the end of December of 2016, and then 200 days later, not business days, but days later, we were fully live with the entire G Suite product suite. And that came with, we started this basically in October, middle of October of 2016. So we did our due diligence in about, 6 or so weeks. That included our contract negotiation with Google. We had big, obviously, concerns as a bank for vetting all of the security and all of the risk, discussions and all the things that, especially as a Canadian corporation and then especially as a Canadian financial institution, that we have to meet. But we were able to move through all of that at sort of lightning speed. And like I say, 200 days later, we were fully live across the organization, which was kind of setting a land speed record at ATB, but also, revealing the importance of moving quickly and having bold transformational steps. So just a little bit more about some of the numbers. Calvin mentioned 5,400 accounts activated. So like I mentioned earlier, we have about 8,000 or 8,500 accounts. One of the things we overlooked during our original work was the impact of shared accounts in Exchange, shared mailboxes in particular. And so, we hadn't realized just how many of those we had until we actually began moving. So we had a bunch of those, but we did implement Google two-step verification as a requirement going in. And so to Calvin's point, we wanted to make sure everyone activated their account beforehand, made sure they set up their 2SV so that we could continue to promote this security culture that we've also been developing. We moved over 340 million mail messages, calendar items, and contacts from our Exchange environment up to G Suite, which is, we had long debates about whether we would, encourage a spring cleaning and whether we'd only bring 30 days or 45 days. And we just decided that, in the spirit of being smart, simple, and helpful, encouraging team members, although it might be interesting, to go and spend time cleaning out their mailbox is pretty much the least productive thing. When we talk about making their time richer, that's not making their time richer. And so we just decided to move all of our history, which is a bit unusual in that respect as well. We had nearly 15,000 Exchange public folders, which is a whole other complicating factor because so much business process was centered around those public folders. That was over 1.5 terabytes of mail. We actually moved that stuff as well in terms of the current activities and moved those workflows to adapt them, and that was partly through those Work Reimagined labs that Calvin talked about, but also just by team members actually digging in and finding new ways to work. We have one example of our banking operations team that started to look at what a collaborative inbox might look like for their team, for example, and within a day had completely revamped their process for the better to be able to move through. And those examples just were incredible because it showed that team members were rallying around it. We talked about the various, so those numbers are a little bit different than what we had earlier, but lots of, again, self-selection in the organization. The labs we talked about. The last 2 points I think are important as well. So we did actually have our first hackathon, which is, again, a bit unusual for a bank to talk, and in fact we had a big conversation
I think
about
we changed the name.
Whether we could actually call it a hackathon, because you don't want to associate hacking with banking, but which actually produced something we called Hacksaw, and we are at this point considering whether we're going to open source Hacksaw. But basically it's this notion of understanding what documents might be on your file shares that actually could be problematic to convert. Because that whole legacy is, again, we've got tons of legacy. So whether this is Excel files that have macros, or again, Word documents that have macros, or advanced maybe formulas that Sheets doesn't have for good reason because they're so obscure that nobody really ever uses them. So we built this utility to go and scan through some of our file shares to try to identify what we thought were the most problematic documents so we could at least inform team members about what might not convert coming over. And so that's been pretty interesting. It's certainly not perfect, but gives us a little bit of insight into the complications and stuff we have. And then, we have, I guess we like to toot our own horn a little bit, of course, although this maybe is the humble brag. I think we have been recognized. You would have seen our logo, hopefully, this morning in the keynote associated with our G Suite implementation. Onyx Networking was a big part as a partner for us in terms of helping us get certainly the technical bits and then also some advice on the traditional adoption side. So we're very happy to continue our relationship with Onyx and grateful for the work that they did for us. And we were featured recently in Forbes and a little bit of an article around our, again, Work Reimagined effort and this adaptive culture that we're building to be able to move forward. And so we're really, again, trying to promote where we are as an organization and continue to highlight what this small little bank in Alberta is doing, although, again, we're probably within the top 30 of banks in North America.
I was going to joke that we were voted #1 Google implementation by us.
By us. Hopefully you will agree as well. So we've talked a lot about these things already. It is, again, fundamentally changed how we've collaborated in the organization. I can't tell you how many times now we have, whether it's through Google Plus communities or now Hangouts chat, where we are now connecting team members in ways that we've never been able to before. One simple example is, you've got an immigrant family that's recently come to Canada or to Alberta. They're coming to ATB to become, integrated into Canadian society, but don't yet speak English. And you get all kinds of different languages. And we've had instances where people have now used Google Translate to be able to have a conversation with that individual, or have literally reached out through Google Plus communities or Hangouts chat to find somebody else in the organization that actually might speak that language, which, again, by being illustrates just how important customer obsession becomes for us. But that connecting those team members has been, really powerful. But we've also, because we've seen such success with G Suite, we are now actively on a mission within the next two and a bit years to essentially move all of our stuff to the cloud, and particularly the Google Cloud Platform, including our core banking system. So, Calvin alluded to the struggle we had a number of years ago when we implemented our SAP Core, as we call it. But now it's the next generation of how we're going to move our SAP Core banking system into the cloud, so that we're able to continue to stay relevant in the in the industry. And as a result, it's really about building on this great relationship that we've been able to develop with Google. So I think partly because we're a bank, we've got a lot of exciting stuff that Google's helping us with, because it can also advance the agenda within the industry, which is important. Alrighty, so the results that we saw, as we talked about, were virtually instant. Like again, we're still seeing those things accrue, although at the same time, a lot of it's really hard to outline or to document. And so we've got some examples that we're going to provide here as well. But we're happy to talk later about some of the other things we've done. But we don't have specific numbers on what our ROI is, for example, because it's really hard to predict how the productivity improvement has helped. But we do know that through engagement, for example, that we have seen an improvement in one of the key metrics, which is tools for team members, and overall engagement is up, as Calvin mentioned. So that's definitely been important for us. So, the streamlined workflows. So a couple of examples of this would be, again, with that early adopters group being part of our executive team. All it took was that first quarterly reporting cycle to really see the improvement that tools like G Suite can provide with its co-authoring capability, for example. So if you might imagine—
That scared me, by the way, because I'm a communicator, and someone's like, "Oh, I sent that to so-and-so," and exactly, I'm like, "Oh my God, that was not ready to share."
Well, and that transparency—
to get over that quick.
Yeah, that transparency was actually important as well. Like, so often we get into situations where everything's confidential. I'm working on it for 2 weeks by myself so that I can get all my thoughts and show how great and awesome and smart I am. And then sending it out and taking it, dragging this thing out. But in the spirit of transparency, being vulnerable to comments that are coming in the moment as you're creating the content was
and collaboration, right? Nobody
important.
owns an idea; it just kind of becomes what it becomes.
For sure. And so, Just coming back to the strategic planning cycle or the quarterly reporting cycle, again, you might imagine those days, and some of you maybe experience this in your organization where, again, you've got to get feedback from 25 people. So you send out the template, they work on it in their own time and their own pace, and often at the last minute, and then it's sent back in to a group of 10 people that have to now figure out a way to consolidate this into a single document, have the same, tone and only to have it sent out again to get comments, and that whole process, and then comments on top of comments, and just the anarchy that happens as a result of a workflow like this. And so with G Suite and docs and slides and sheets, we've largely been able to eliminate that in our organization. And again, to Calvin's point of transparency, really been able to leverage just being open and being vulnerable to feedback right away versus sitting on it, which is, again, allowing us to go faster. Another example with some of the cool features of Sheets, like Sheets gets kicked around quite a bit. It's never going to replace Excel. Well, I don't know. I like to joke that I'm a reformed accountant because I was going to be a professional accountant at one time of my career, and so I would say I was biased towards Excel as well. But there are some formulas in Excel, or in Sheets, that Excel doesn't have that are incredible. So one is, an example of that is being able just to consolidate data through various different formulas where, in our people and culture area, when we do our quarterly talent reviews, again, you can imagine spreadsheets going out to 600 or 700 managers to rate, employees on succession planning, or again, where they fit into our 9 boxes, we call it, and then having to consolidate that all back to one central overall list for our senior leadership team. Again, massive undertaking, but just using some simple formulas that are basically already in Sheets, and then using the Explore AI features to actually be able to do some analysis and to start to produce visualizations or even just charts. Huge improvement in terms of reducing the time it takes to collect that, and the pain in which to do that is enormous. And so just a couple of examples there, of where we really truly have tried to take out some of the mundane tasks, and obviously taking advantage of what Google's doing. Like even what we saw in the keynote today, this people will be all over Smart, or already all over Smart Reply in Gmail, but Smart Compose is probably going to be huge for us to again continue to reduce the time it takes. So Calvin, do you want to talk a little bit about?
Yeah, sure. Very using the example we have up here on the banking operations team, but I'll give another one is our support model. So we touched on how we use G+ community to support each other when we launched, but we also just launched something called Onboarding Express, which was an entirely new method of how we opened accounts and how it went from 45 minutes to 10, but people got a tablet. So 900 team members ended up getting a tablet, new method of doing it. They had to set up the tablets and go through all that. And so we talked about how can we reimagine our support model compared to them phoning in, waiting on hold, dealing with somebody. And so they used the G Suite, they created a G+ community, and we went into that peer-to-peer support. And so after maybe it was 2 weeks that we had gone live to 900 people, they had 2 calls into the support center. So people were using the tools again to build off that peer-to-peer support, answering each other's questions. We had some SMEs in there that could quickly answer, but they were getting answers quickly. Because often they'd have a customer in front of them, right, where they're trying to figure this out. So to call in and wait on hold in the call center wasn't going to be great. So it was, people just kind of stepping up and reinventing the way they work. Yeah,
and I think those business processes, or that example, is pretty key to, again, a lot of examples of, again, peers or teammates across the organization jumping in to help and really being responsive. Because again, in order for us to survive, it's all about speed. And we actually, that was one of our, we'll say, the saving graces of our work with going live was Hangouts Chat. We were on the early adopters program at that time. And Hangouts Chat became a phenomenon in our organization because, if somebody could have a question about something they were seeing, or, why doesn't this mailbox now not receive emails from the external world? Or, hey, I think I maybe missed a little bit of mail that I was expecting to see in Gmail. But we were able to, the team was jumping on these things left and right to be able to answer those questions quickly, rather than in the traditional world, which would sometimes take days to get a ticket logged, have to make the phone call in the first place, and then have somebody call you back. And so it was huge for us. And I think probably most importantly for us now, it's really about this idea of anywhere, anytime. So, as we talked about earlier, banking is being disrupted. We would say banking is now very digital, and expertise is mobile. So many of you in the room, and myself included, probably never want to go to a bank branch if you don't have to. I go to bank branches now because I work at a bank, but at the same time, if I never had to, I wouldn't. And so, banking becoming very digital is important to, again, survival. But this notion, like, we still find customers that are very, they want to talk to the experts. So whether that's a personal banker, whether that's an investment advisor, but why should that person have to go to the bank branch to have that conversation, right? We're now sending our people to those locations. So you might be a farmer. Well, why shouldn't we meet you at your silo so we can have that banking conversation or get that expertise that you need? Or you want to talk about investments, why shouldn't we come to your home? And so G Suite has actually allowed us to become mobile as a result of that. So, lots of examples of team members, myself included. My youngest son is in marching band, so he's often really busy, and we love to go see him perform. But I can't tell you how many times where I've thought of something, I got to update that document, and I can literally pull out my phone and update that document. Or, team members working with a customer and being able to have that dialogue. So
I think, can I give one example?
Sure,
I
please.
think what I realized was you have to intentionally shut off as well, because it allows you too much anytime, anywhere. And it was when I first got into as an early adopter and part of the project. It was Saturday morning, 10 a.m., whatever. I'm lying in bed, still watching TV. So it's probably earlier than 10. I'm not that lazy. And I see something, and I start editing this document while I'm lying in bed, and I'm like, okay, it's Saturday morning. Like,
well, I think you've hit on something really important, which is we're not really talking about it in terms of work-life balance anymore. It's more like work-life integration. Yeah. And there is and I know Google's working on this, I'll call it digital wellness type initiative or type of perspective, which is sometimes you do need to shut off. But I think at the same time, if you do need to do something, you're not restricted by having to log in through VPNs and all of the extra effort that used to take place to make that possible. And especially with cellular technologies improving to the point that they have. Another just a quick example, although not maybe into the anytime, anywhere perspective, but we also transformed all of our meeting rooms, as we talked about, with Chromebox devices, and now some Meet hardware as well. And again, I can't tell you how many times, like when we talk about anywhere, anytime, so again, I can be on that meeting on my phone in a hockey arena if I want it to be, or in the room where people will walk up and start the meeting, where it used to take 15 minutes to start every meeting, and EAs would lose their minds with worry about whether they could actually get a meeting started. Like, those issues have certainly gone away for us, so which is great. So just to close off, and Calvin and I'll stick around if you've got questions, or I see there's a mic here, you can certainly ask us as well. But Wellington Holbrook, as our Chief Transformation Officer, has really been key at driving this notion of bold transformation. And a little bit of a quote there, but if he is here at Next, but in another session, but he's very passionate about driving this notion of transforming banking. And so we're very excited to share our story here, and thank you for joining us. And if you do have any questions, we'd love to try to answer them for you. Thank you. Please.
So first of all, congratulations on a pretty awesome transition to G Suite.
Thank you.
My question is,
yeah, please maybe come to the mic so we don't have to.
Oh, and now we're out of time. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
So my question is, you mentioned that, so it sounds like most of this was very independently designed and implemented, but you did mention that there was Onyx and Google in some way also. So could you speak to what those pieces were, where you required that assistance, and also what gaps, if any, were in that process or in that piece?
Sure. Well, I could maybe start, and Calvin, if you want to. Yep. So I think certainly on the Onyx side, and both on the Onyx and Google side, like I'll call it the strategic vision, and I'll call it the guidance to avoid some of the pitfalls that have happened in other organizations, were some of the most important discussions we had up front. And so I'll call it the guidance part of that was there. I wouldn't call it a gap, but I think what we wanted to tread new ground. And so a lot of the stuff, whether it be the Evangelist journey and hooking up with Singularity University, and and even some of the, again, self-selection process, was driven more by our our own culture. And so I think we deviated a little bit from some of the guidance there, only to be able to do it in a kind of a unique way that meant it was important to ATB. I don't know, Calvin, if...
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's hard for anyone, we were moving so fast for a consultant to come into our culture. So when we look at the adoption side, the non-technical side, we really did want to push boundaries. And so I think it was hard to partner with someone externally when we were taking this like Renaissance legendary type approach. That was a tricky for us. So we kind of went but we did try to use as much knowledge as they had. We did not want to make mistakes other people had had, and we just didn't have that exposure. So that was great. And then I hope that they took stuff from us that they can use in other.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we don't want to keep you from other sessions, but just 2 plugs. There is a case study about ATB Financial related to G Suite on the Google website, so have a look at that. And also check out atbalphabeta.com, which is a site where we're talking a lot about the innovative things that we're doing in banking. And so love you to connect with us that way as well. So Calvin and I will stick around for sure for any other questions, but thanks for joining us.